Okay, now let's shift out of that. That's kind of a political thing, but we have to talk about how this has an impact on the Cold War. I mentioned Reagan being kind of a change. He is a change not only from the Carter, but he's also a change from Nixon. He's a change from Eisenhower. I made the mention that Eisenhower wasn't that different than FDR in terms of many of the policies. Well, Nixon had a different political foreign policy in the sense that he was able to end the Vietnam War using this triangulation against China, but on many other policies, he's not that different from even LBJ. He didn't end many of the Great Society programs. So Reagan really represents this kind of a change. Sometimes they refer to it as a Reagan revolution. He has a change in domestic and foreign policies. I'm focusing mainly on the foreign policies. And in order to understand how he is responsible for ending this war, you have to understand what it is that he does different than the presidents that came before him. Now, before we do this, I'm going to give you some terminology. And there's lots of acronyms, lots of initials here. And so I'm going to tell you what these initials are because they'll help you. I'm just going to go at a time. ICBM, Intercontinental Ballistic Missile. IRBM, Intermediate Range Ballistic Missile. SLBM, Submarine Launched Ballistic Missile, also short range. ABM, Anti-Ballistic Missiles. These are the missiles that shoot out other missiles. MIRVs, Multiple Independently Guided Re-entry Vehicles. These are a reaction to the ABMs. If you're going to shoot a missile to hit another missile, then the best solution is to put like 6 missiles in that missile. Only one of them is going to have a nuclear warhead. The other ones will be dummies, but they'll go all over. And if you're the guy who's being shot at, you don't know which one has the weapon, the warhead, and which one is a dummy. So you have to shoot every single one of them. The MIRV helps to make the ABM, at this point, somewhat obsolete. These are all acronyms. They're all types of weapons. The last thing that you need to know is this MAD, Mutually Assured Destruction. I'll talk about that in a second. We already mentioned it a little bit. Now, just a short history on nuclear weapons. After World War II, the United States had to decide whether they're going to put their military defenses into missiles or into someplace else. You may have recalled, I didn't talk about it very much, but if you read your textbook or if you've seen any History Channel documentaries on this, the Germans had missiles. We're beginning to do missile technology during the war. It's called the V1 and the V2. The V1 was just like this, I don't want to say a bottle rocket, but very much like a bottle rocket. It was huge and it caused a lot of damage, but you had no guidance whatsoever. You just kind of aim it this way and it shoots and it lands somewhere. And so very useless in terms of an actual military. It scared people, but it didn't have any impact. A V2, towards the very end of this war, was beginning to be a little bit better at guidance, but there was no way of guaranteeing that it's going to actually hit what you're going to hit. So at this time in the 50s, a lot of these German scientists become American scientists. And we decided, are we going to go with the missile program? Are we going to go with using rockets for defense? Or are we going to do something else? And in the end, we decided we won't do missiles. In the 1950s, instead of missiles, we put our energy on aircraft carriers, really big aircraft carriers. And the benefit of a big aircraft carrier is that you can put it anywhere around the world, and you can have bombers on the aircraft carrier. They can just fly off, drop the bomb, and fly back. That way you don't have to worry about guidance. You don't have to worry about making sure you hit where you're going to hit. That aircraft bomber will make sure it hits. And so that's where we pursued for most of the 50s. Things changed in 1957 when the Soviets sent up, this is a satellite, it's about the size of a big basketball, Sputnik. They sent the Sputnik into the atmosphere and it became the first satellite. It's not a nuclear weapon, it's nothing, it's basically a radio beacon. It goes beep, 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 nothing else. But the fact is, if you can put a satellite into orbit, that means that it can go around the world over and over again. If you can put it into orbit, you might be able to program it to come down from orbit. And suddenly we look at missiles in a completely new light. Sputnik caused the rocket program in the United States to be reinvigorated. It's after Sputnik that we decide we're going to start not only doing rockets, but we are going to think about going to the moon. And the space program looks like we're going to do it because we want to see the moon and touch the moon, but the main motivation behind the space program is that if we can safely bring people from the Earth to the moon and land them back up, then we can also safely, more or less, send up a missile, have it go outside the Earth's orbit, and land anywhere on the world. And so the space technology, the space race, was kind of a secondary impact on practicing and developing our long-range missile defense system. So it's after Sputnik that we start building ICBMs. In the early 60s, there are no intercontinental ballistic missiles. There aren't really too many intermediate range missiles, but we developed those first. Submarine-launched missiles and intermediate ballistic missiles are kind of being developed at the same time. It takes most of the 60s, about mid-60s, before we're able to develop this. And by the time we get to the mid-60s, they do have missiles in the United States, in Iowa, in California, in Alaska, that can fly up and land and hit any point on Earth. But this is late. And as the United States is building this, of course, Soviet Union is building this. Now, that's just technology. One of the things that we have to look at in terms of the history is that there were some people that were very afraid of this missile technology. They weren't afraid as much because the Soviet Union is going to attack us. There were some people that were afraid that if we have this technology, the Soviet Union will be frightened into thinking that there's no way that they'll ever win, that this will be a first strike technology. In other words, we might be able to shoot this from far, far away, destroy the Soviet Union, and then we don't have any mutually assured destruction. And so there was kind of a policy, an attempt to try to make sure that we were all even. We deliberately looked for evenness. Now the Soviet Union was developing these missiles, but they were always lying about how many missiles they made. Remember, rule of might doesn't worry about honesty or being true to the law. They'll do whatever they need to do. So they might say, we're only developing a few hundred missiles, and they might have 10,000 in production. So the United States tried to come up with treaties, the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, SALT. Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty was an attempt to limit the number of missiles that both sides had so that they were both equal, which means that if they're both equal, then they would both have mutually assured destruction. That way nobody would fight. And so we would have deterrence, continued deterrence. If we both know that both of us are pointing guns at each other, then we won't cross the line. And the weapons are these big guns. This is kind of a policy. And the thing is that it's not just a Republican policy. Republicans and Democrats supported this. This was an American policy to try to maintain equity. If the Soviets got too many weapons, then there was a risk that they would attack and then wipe all of our weapons out. And if they knew that, then there would be no cost. The cost of their war would be super low. Then they would win, and then they would come in. So we couldn't let them have this confidence that they could destroy all of our weapons before we even started. If they had that belief, then they might actually use it. So to prevent them from engaging in the war, we have to have equity, a balance. There has to be equality. But we don't need more than equality. If the Russians decide they have 10,000, all we need are about 1,500 with the multiple entry MIRV warheads, and that would have the equivalent of like 10,000 actual targets. And so that would be enough to guarantee that if the Soviets launched, we would launch and they would be destroyed. And if they know that they would be destroyed if they launched, they won't launch. It's the theory behind mutually assured destruction, nuclear deterrence. There's a downside of mutual assured destruction, and it's not the type of downside that you might think of. The typical Hollywood downside is that you've got two people pointing guns at each other, and if they just keep increasing the number of guns, and there's tons of guns on one side, and there's tons of guns on the other side, that someone's going to get twitchy, they're going to get sweaty, they're going to get nervous, they're going to do whatever, some crazy person's going to shoot, and then boom, everybody dies. If you've ever watched the movie Dr. Strangelove, 1962, that's the whole point of the theory of the movie. It's a comedy, dark comedy, but some crazy person decides that he's going to shoot first, and this is going to create a world war. Many movies came out about this.